Yeah, we do. Okay. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:04. I'm sorry we're a little late. We had to wait to get a quorum to get started. Now, in person and online, we have a quorum of the board. And more are arriving right now, coming up in the elevator. So Chris is going to be our minute taker. We have time set aside for public comment. We allow 10 minutes, and I'll check right now in person. Is there anyone in person who has a public comment? I don't have Krista here to read our norms. So. All right, is there anyone online for a public comment? If you'd raise your hand.
Trying to figure that out. I'd like to. I'm just trying to figure out how to raise my hand.
Ask her again.
Christy, was that you?
Yes, I'm. There we go.
There you go, Christy.
I was just looking at the agenda. I was concerned about who we've lost for staff. Apparently a speech language pathologist, a social worker, and now a nurse. So are there other staff people we've lost?
Okay, Christy, we don't usually answer questions during the public comment period.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But we've heard you and your concern.
Okay. Concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? All right. Looks like we have a few more coming in. Oh, hi, Hannah. Have a seat. Oh, Herb, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Listen, Christy's question is a very important one. I really hope it's answered at some point because, this is a critical point in the budget discussion. So I hope Christy's question is answered at some point. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Herb. Okay. All right. Not seeing any other hands up. So we'll move down to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Yes.
Sarah? Okay, is there a second?
I'll second
Andrew, thank you. All right, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries. Okay, next we have an executive session under Title I VSA 313A7, Student Academic Records Suspension or Discipline. We're going to need to invite Justin Bouvier, Parent A, Patrick Reen, and Shannon Warden to join us in that executive session. Is there a board member willing to make that motion?
I so move.
Sandy?
I'll second.
And Sarah. All right, all those in favor of going into executive session under Title I VSA 313A7 and inviting Justin Bouvier, Parent A, Patrick Reen, and Shannon Warden to join us at 6:08, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so board members, we'll leave this Zoom meeting and join the private one that was sent. Okay, just give us a few minutes to get down the hall. Okay, so we're moving on to executive limitations monitoring update on the financial report, which was included in your packet. Are there any questions in the room from board members? Any board members in Zoom land who have questions about the financial report? Okay,
No.
okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on to the budget presentation. Here you are.
Okay, I think I can just drive from here. I'll share my screen in a moment. I think first I'm going to send some hard copies down of
Sorry.
a couple of things. So one is, and board members have these electronically too, but I thought you might want to take notes on these hard copies. And there's some other hard copies of these on the back table there near the door. So what's coming down is a document that captured the questions that were raised last week on the 14th. And there are some written responses. Some of these responses direct you to the budget presentation. So there's that sort of relationship between the two. But I wanted to just sort of give you the written responses to the questions. And then walk through the budget presentation. You can take questions as we move through. So I'll share my screen. First I have to get back in the meeting. Okay, looks like I'm back in. All right, here we go. So, kind of start off with some of the demographics, looking at enrollment. I don't know what it is, so I can see my screen. So this is the same slide that you saw in the October presentation. This is the enrollment over the years, including this year and what's projected for next year. As you can see, there's a pretty steady decline. Most recent years, the decline is sharpest at Lincoln, but definitely a decline across all schools. When we think about enrollment, a lot of times that translates for us in thinking about class size, in particular as we're looking at elementary schools, and it's important to start to strive for comparable class sizes across elementary schools. So the second slide here shows you average class sizes across the elementary schools last year and this current year, or I should say this current year and projected for next year. Again, on one of the slides we're going to look at, it mentions a reduction of one classroom at Lincoln anticipated for next year, and that's specifically to reflect the declining enrollment, as well as a 0.1 reduction in the building principal time there, again to reflect the decline in enrollment. And that brings Lincoln's staffing levels in terms of classrooms and administration into check with where Beeman is now, given that they'll have considerable or a comparable enrollment. And if you were to compare these to the class size guidelines, you'd see that we're pretty well within those guidelines overall. Probably the most notable, slightly higher than what we're looking for, average class size 3 through 6 at Lincoln next year, and the flip side, a slightly undersized average class size in the K2 at Lincoln next year. So overall, across the school, right where we would want to be seeing but a little bit of that differentiation K2 and 3-6. And again, just the class size guidelines here for reference as they relate to that slide. And then I just thought a summary would be helpful as we look across the last several years as a district, but also by school, because that's sort of how it's felt in each of our schools. So since FY18, and this is projecting out to FY23, so that's a 6-year period, as a district, we're down about 9%. That's 136 students. So again, this is enrollment, not equalized pupils. We'll look at something different for equalized pupils. But that plays out a little differently across the different schools. So in that time period, over those 6 years, Beeman's lost 13% of its students. Bristol's essentially flat. They're up 1 student from where they were 6 years ago. Lincoln's down 48, which is 41%. Moncton 13%, Robinson 29%, and Mount Abe 2%. But I think what's important to note here, and this is part of what we'll feel over the next several years, Mount Abe's enrollment isn't down, but these declines that we're seeing in the K6 will work their way through the high school. What's challenging about that is as they do that, high school students are weighted more heavily. And again, the weighting formula may change. I think high school students are still weighted more heavily than elementary in that new formula, whichever version might be landed on. So in anticipation of our greatest loss of students coming at the secondary level for the next several years, we're going to see a sharper decline in equalized pupils given the higher weight. So that's a pinch that we're going to feel on top of some other pinches into the future. And feel free to stop at any point if a board member has a question that I can try to answer. So again, looking now at equalized pupils, taking it out of enrollment, it gets a little trickier because we have some years that didn't actually reflect our drop in equalized pupils because of the decision to hold districts harmless. And so the first year we see that is in the year we're in now, FY22. And so we were given credit for 1,465 equalized pupils, but we don't actually have 1,465 equalized pupils. It's less than that. Going into next year, we're given credit for 1,439 equalized pupils, but we won't have that next year. I thought for reference, it would be important to show you what we project we would have next year if the hold harmless wasn't going to be in place. Our projections are that that number would be just under 1,405. So that's about a 61 equalized pupil drop from where we are this year, if not for the hold harmless. Factor that out by about $20,000 a student, and that's some pretty real money in terms of the impact it has on our ability to spend. So that's kind of the pinch that we're feeling.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Is that number derived from current equalized pupil formulas, the 1404?
Yes, that's based on the formula as we know it now for the weighting, that weighting formula. Doesn't take into account anything from a change to that formula, if that's the question. And if the formula changes, exactly what it will change to is unclear at this point. So we wouldn't really have a lot to go on otherwise. And I think it's highly unlikely, assuming that formula does change, that we're not going to see that begin to take effect in FY23. I think the earliest we would see that is FY24, and I think we can expect it will be rolled out over a course of a number of years. I think if I saw in the most recent weighting study, it was recommended to roll it out over 5 years. And again, what sticks and what doesn't from that report is unknown, but that's the recommendation. And so I think it's helpful to put sort of this graph into perspective in terms of dollars. And so if we go back to FY18, right? So our projected equalized pupil for next year, FY23, is 95 equalized pupil fewer than where we were in FY18. So if we assumed we didn't lose any equalized pupil, if that stayed flat, that equates to, at FY23's projected cost per equalized pupil, That means we could spend almost $1.9 million more in FY23 than what's projected and keep the same cost per pupil, which of course drives the tax rate the same way, because cost per equalized pupil is sort of the direct driver to the tax rate. If we weren't held harmless, that 1404 figure that I showed is 130 equalized pupil fewer than FY18, which would put it in the almost $2.6 million difference in what we could spend and keep the same cost per equalized pupil. So that's really intended to put that monetary value to a loss of equalized pupil to help articulate the challenges that we're navigating right now. So we'll start to get into some of the assumptions as we drive a little deeper into the FY23 projected budget. A lot of these are the same as the October, in that the positions that we chose not to fill, the positions we took advantage of through attrition, as in this budget that we're going to see tonight, we continue to not fill those positions going into that budget.
Patrick, I have a question. When you're calculating equalized pupils, if Lincoln moves forward, or when Lincoln moves forward to pulling out of the district, what year would that impact our equalized pupil count?
I'm not sure I have enough information to say with any certainty when that would be. I think it's certain that it's not next year. I think it could be as early as the following year and potentially get pushed out 1 year after that. I think it depends on probably mostly the State Board of Education and what their decision is. And really just thinking about how that's playing out in Britain. So as we talked about in building FY23, this is a reduction of 1 classroom and 0.1 admin at Lincoln. It does assume a 10% increase in healthcare premiums. And Floyd, I think that's information we've been given to use in building the budget. Even though we are held harmless with our ADM, we are still expecting a drop of 25.99 equalized pupil from current year into next year. And that's a factor of how the equalized pupil count is an average over 2 years. So the result of that, even though we are held harmless, is 25.99, which seems like a lot, and it actually is quite a lot. It's still a big dollar impact, but it's a whole lot less than the 61 that we would be working with if we didn't have the hold harmless. So it's less than half the impact it would be otherwise.
Patrick,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a sense of, like, how do we know whether hold harmless will be or not be? Is there any read on that at all?
Last year, at this time, we didn't know we would have hold harmless to bank on this year. And it was actually since October, when we gave the presentation, we learned that there would be hold harmless again for FY23.
So we do know that to be the case for the next budget year? Okay,
Correct.
so I didn't
Yeah.
quite realize that.
But we don't know that more than a budget year out.
Right, okay,
It's
thank you.
also really important to note that the hold harmless is for 1 year.
I'm sorry, say again?
It's for 1 year,
Right.
meaning, so we're averaging this year's counts, and we're not averaging them with last year's or the year before. We're averaging with the year before that. That's the hold harmless that has come forward.
Gotcha, okay. That's what it means, the hold harmless.
That's what it means, is we're holding harmless for 2 years
What the decrease
of
is.
what the decrease would have been, which makes sense because we had a really large decrease last year for home study kids.
Right.
Some of those have returned, which bodes well for us on 25 as the drop. But it's very important that hold harmless sounds great, but really what it is you just get a better year, and then the 22 numbers are starting to show those drops,
Right,
and then you average.
okay.
It buys some time, but it doesn't eliminate the challenge that we have to work through with the decline in enrollment.
Okay.
Patrick, you had one of your bullet points is more conservative of 2 yield projections. the fund is projected to have $90 million in surplus, the state education fund. I don't know what the legislature is going to do with that. The governor has suggested putting half of that into yield. So is that part of what your projections or assumptions are going forward?
Not at this time. I think there are a lot of hands interested in getting into that $90 million pot. I think the question is which hands are going to prevail and what's the impact going to be. I do think, so we were given 2 yields from the state, and our practice, which is consistent with the practices of all the districts I've spoken with anyway, is to use the more conservative of the 2 at this point, recognizing that it could be more favorable. And if there is a sizable chunk of that 90 million, then that only impacts us to the positive from where we're building right now. And as we get more information, that's sort of the challenge with the budget building process is it's kind of an iterative process, and we don't always get all the information we'd like to have before we have to adopt a budget. That may end up being the case with understanding what's going to happen with the 90 million and understanding how that might impact the yield, et cetera. So I think the appropriate approach to take is to use the more conservative of the 2 and be pleasantly perhaps not surprised when it's better than what we're working from.
That probably makes sense, but you're saying that the yield projections in the December letter did not take into account any of the $90 million.
I'll let Floyd dig in, but I don't know.
So the guidance we got from Brad James as that letter came out was if you're looking at the higher number, you're going to get kicked in the teeth because it's not going to happen. I mean, that's the reality from the AOE is don't plan on the higher number.
Well,
it's also an interesting kind of
I agree. That's a good idea. I just wondered whether those numbers from the tax department, which writes the December letter, whether they included any of the 90 million's projected surplus in the fund in their yield projections, or did they do it excluding the 90 million?
Both. One was taking the entire 90 million to offset, which is what the high number is. The other is saying we're going to move forward, assuming the legislature has other plans for that 90 million. And that was the guidance from Brad, was to start your budgets with that as the baseline. If it gets better, that's easy news to share.
Yeah, thanks, Floyd. I appreciate that.
So kind of moving through, another assumption is that we have a $1.4 million fund balance. It's not audited at this point, but we feel pretty confident with that figure. I have some thoughts I'll share about what to do with that fund balance. Also, the assumption is that the spending threshold doesn't return for next year. It's not expected to. Future years is more in question, but not for next year. And nothing in here has any impact from the weighting study, in part because we don't know where that's going to go, and in part because even if it does move forward, it's highly, highly unlikely to impact FY23 given the late date. And so, oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Still muted.
Hi, thanks. I just was thinking about, and this doesn't have to be answered right now, but when I'm looking at the positions that we, I guess, so I'm thinking about the positions that we're attempting to hire right now, if they were available, and I don't really know where we are in the process for some of the supports that we were looking for. And I am thinking about those as being coming out of the ESSER funds. And so that's why we don't see that as a part of this budget conversation, because they were being paid for with the temporary funds, or am I'm looking for a little understanding of that at some point, because I know that I believed that there were some positions being sought to be hired. So how does that, is that just a separate budget type question from the funds versus this? Um,
So it is true that we have multiple positions right now that some are filled and some we're still trying to fill, and we've had some that we did fill and they left and now we're trying to fill again. So it's kind of, there are a few different scenarios playing out there, but there are multiple positions we're paying for through ESSER funds. And in a lot of likelihood, several of those are going to be things that we want to support going forward. There's a process we need to engage in to get to the point of decision making around those. But that is true, and that is a separate fund and wouldn't be part of this budget that we're building. In addition to those, and this is where we're starting to get into some of the board questions from the other night and some feedback I've been collecting from principals and staff, in addition to what positions ESSER is funding, in light of the recognized need, I think we need to work to build some other capacity internally as well, and to do it in a way that we can sustain post-ESSER funds. Because those are one-time funds that if we build a lot of staffing dependence on and then they all go away, we're left in a really tough spot. So we want to be thinking about how do we sustain some additional support going forward to meet the need that we're seeing. And that's kind of what we're starting to get into with this next slide.
Thank you.
So,
Patrick, sorry, just to follow up on that 1.0 classroom teacher in Lincoln, is that person just moving to a different building then?
Yeah, and we'll have to see. In all likelihood, I would say yes. You know, looking back historically, I can't think of a time when there wasn't some attrition that we could take advantage of in a scenario like this, where it's a reassignment and not a RIF. So I have every expectation that that's how that will play out. Exactly how is unknown at this point. We don't know who's going to be retiring. We don't know who's going to take a job somewhere else. We don't know what that movement's going to be. But I'm pretty confident that we're going to have an opportunity to make that change in a way that is a reassignment. As I mentioned, I think when I was distributing these documents, there are some questions that are embedded in this presentation and others that are not. Obviously, this one is one of the questions from last week that made sense as we were looking at this budget and building into this presentation. And the question was really around, is that 5% increase per equalized pupil, the target the board says, that's sufficient to provide social and emotional support that we want to provide our students, and if not, what is? And as is typically the case with budget stuff and other school complicated things, the answer is maybe not. It's not, things are not usually very definitive one way or the other. So, and really it depends on how we want to use that fund balance that we spoke to before. So let's kind of walk through this a little bit. First, let's talk about the need that we're seeing. So based on feedback from principals and work principals had done with staff to ask about what needs they're seeing that we thought could be met through ESSER funds, I think those needs, whether it's ESSER funds or general budget that we use to help meet those needs, is probably less important than the reality that these are the needs people are expressing. And so pretty consistently what I was seeing from building leaders and principals was we need more support in mental health, we need more support around student safety, and we need more support in sort of the oversight and support for student and family needs. And so I tried to sort of identify some possible positions for us to think about that would fit those categories. What we'll get into is I'm going to make a recommendation for a dollar amount to add to the budget to support increasing our positions in these categories. I'm not at this point ready to say exactly which positions I think make the most sense. There's a process that I think we need to go through to identify in what ways does it make the most sense to spend our regular fund dollars, and in what ways can those expenses be supplemented by these one-time funds of ESSER. But to give you an idea, some positions that were specifically referenced, social workers, school psychologists, clinicians, counselors, sort of fitting under that mental health. There may be others. It's not an exhaustive list, but some idea of the kinds of supports that we might want to increase. Around safety, there are some new requirements around Title IX processes and what needs to happen in those investigations to ensure that steps are taken, student rights are protected, and we're legally protecting ourselves and ensuring that we are following the proper procedures. that Title IX process involves at least 4 different personnel to be hands-on in following the steps that are outlined in that. Our thinking is it's really more designed around to be for larger universities to follow that have that kind of staffing and those sorts of resources, but it applies equally to small school districts as well. Also, the bullying, hazing, and harassment process is something that's quite significant, and we want to make sure that we're doing well. This is really around protecting students, so thinking about ways to support that. And then just overall crisis planning and helping to support schools in building crisis plans, developing practices, really ensuring that we continue to hone our skills broadly to keep our students safe. And then thinking about the oversight and support for student and family needs, really thinking about kind of the more intensive needs. So really looking at ways to support families who find themselves homeless and the processes around that, and bringing in the supports that parents and families can access under the McKinney-Vento Act is something that we want to look at. 504 coordination across our schools. We made some shifts a few years back to try and approach that differently. We're having a lot of hiccups with that, and we're not doing as well as we could or should in helping to ensure that students with that level of need that the processes are followed, that the documentation is there, that people know what needs to happen, etc. So we want to look for ways to improve there. And then just thinking about community outreach, community connectedness, and thinking about ways we can connect more with families to support what their needs might be. So these are ideas, these are themes that have surfaced in gathering some of this feedback. And these are some of the kinds of things that I would look to work with others to figure out what's the right combination of roles and responsibilities to spend the added money that I'll be requesting on. And so, sticking with that question, my recommendation is that we add $500,000 to the MAUSD budget, and that would allow us to support adding 5 or 6 professional positions. It sort of depends on where we land on the pay scale. We've calculated that the average professional staff employee in MAUSD in total compensation, so salary, benefits, etc., is $93,000. Is that right, Floyd? So that 500K, depending on if they land right at the average or above the average or below the average, would support 5 to 6 positions. And again, that could be some combination of positions and contracting with partner agencies. Exactly how best to utilize that 500K requires more process, more thinking before any decisions can be made there. But really around supporting mental health, safety, and those intensive needs. And then I'll finish these bullets, and then we can take some questions on those. And the benefit of having built that into the budget as opposed to relying on ESSER is if they're built into the budget and we can work to sustain those going forward, big question if we can support those going forward. The idea being that we need to find a way to sustain some of the support post-ESSER. ESSER runs through next year. I don't see these additional needs going away next year, but it is expected that ESSER funds do. So we want to be able to think beyond ESSER. And doing so can help us stretch the education reserve dollars that we have. I have some ideas about what to add to that ed reserve, but we want to try to make sure that the ed reserve gets us as far as it can as we work through some challenging years to come. So we can pause there for some questions. Liz?
I thank you so much. I appreciate the budget a lot so far, and and that you got so many questions answered and sent to us so quickly. And my understanding of the community schools is that what they are willing to do or what they're offering is that it's related to universal lunches, but also to hiring a coordinator, I think is what it is. Somebody like that would be that position in the schools to do some of that. Maybe it could be related to this. So I wonder if we would qualify for the community schools and be able to get maybe that position covered by that somehow, or I just thought it, just thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the details around that. When that came out several months ago, there was an opportunity to apply for some funding. I don't recall the amount. And the initial glance, there was some question about eligibility. I don't think our free reduced lunch population was quite high enough, but there were other eligibility aspects. I don't recall, Floyd or Katrina, any details coming to mind around that?
I do think you're right. I think they were looking at district FRL numbers, and I don't think we were high enough.
And as a district, we're in the 33-35% range,
Right.
which doesn't rank very high in the state. But nevertheless, I think there are other opportunities to achieve the same support. And we just sort of, like all things, we have to weigh that with all the other need that we have to try to meet. And again, we have this combination of ESSER funds and potentially some added funds in the regular budget, if this seems acceptable to the board, to think about how we can creatively take advantage of all the funds available. And so this is where sort of the use of that fund balance ties in with that request for adding 500,000, which comes back to the question of this 5%, and what's 5% or not 5%. So I mentioned we have a little over 1.4 million in the anticipated fund balance from last year, and my recommendation is to place 870,000 of that into the capital reserve. So we've laid out a lot of projects that are needed, thinking about the lobby project, which is the first. We talked about a roof at Mount A. We talked about the electrical upgrade, which might include some solar energy, if that makes sense as we explore that further. That one's a couple of years out. This 870, as I've worked with Floyd, is what's needed based on our anticipated cost to move those projects forward as we've laid them out for you. So that meets that capital reserve need. And that leaves the 549,000 balance, and there are kind of two options for that I'll lay out for you in terms of what we can do with that. So one option, option A, is that we use $430,000 of that 549 to offset taxes. If we use that amount to offset taxes, that allows us to increase spending by 500,000 as I've recommended, and stay at that 5% increase in the cost per equalized pupil that the board set as a target. It actually puts us at 4.99%. And that would leave 119,000 to put into the education reserve. The ed reserve right now has, I think, 550,000 in it. So if we go with option A, increase in the cost per equalized pupil hits that 5% target, and we add 119, which puts us right around 670,000 in the ed reserve fund balance, which again, the ed reserve is money that can be spent at the board's discretion. It does not require voter approval, and it can be used for almost anything. I won't say anything because that's an absolute, and I avoid absolutes. Almost anything that's not a capital expense. Then the capital reserve can only be spent for capital. It can't be used for personnel or anything else. So that's where the combination of the two funds offers some options to the board to get some things done. Capital reserve spending does require voter approval. So option A. Option B would be to use $0 of the fund balance to offset taxes. That results in a 6.59% increase in the cost per equalized pupil. So this would not hit that 5% target. This would be over that target by a little over 1.5%. What that does, though, is it allows you to put 549,000 into the ed reserve, giving the ed reserve about a $1.1 million fund balance. And so thinking about option A or option B, it's probably worth thinking about where might we go with this ed reserve. So we talked before about life after ESSER, right? It's fun to think about life after COVID. It's less fun to think about life after ESSER. I think we could, and again, there's a lot of unknowns, right? We have a lot of moving parts, which there are always a lot of moving parts in building a budget. We have fallen into a pattern of having even more moving parts as we built the last couple of budgets, and it's no different this year. Knowing we have a lot of moving parts, it is entirely possible that we will find ourselves post-ESSER dollars and more efficient, more sustainable MAUSD or merged district, wherever we're going to go, wherever we're going to land. We don't know where we're going to land yet, but we know we have to do something to be more sustainable. And so I can envision us having at least a year of in between ESSER and more efficient and sustainable. I think we want to be thinking about having a pretty robust education reserve to help bridge that gap. Again, current balance is $550,000. If we went with option B, that puts about 1.1 million in there to bridge the gap. If we go with option A, that puts about, I think we said 570. So a pretty substantial difference. No, 670, wasn't it? There's 550 now, so 670. So again, a little over $400,000 difference in what we'd have in the education reserve. And I do think the 500,000, so again, thinking about this year that is this bridge that we might need to build, and we don't know that we're going to need to build it, but we need to be thinking about the potential of needing to build it. The added 500K, assuming we can sustain that, plus the 1.1 million, I think puts us in pretty good shape to build that bridge from post-ESSER to wherever we land after these processes kind of work themselves through. That was just a few bullet points, but there's a lot in there, so I'm just pausing for a minute.
So my question is over 2 years. So last year there was little or, if I recall correctly, little or no increase in education taxes for our district. So over 2 years, 6.9 would be 3.5% a year. Certainly a reasonable number. It seems to me that putting the most we possibly can in the Ed Reserve Fund makes the most sense, both in terms of the bridging you were speaking about, also because if the budget were to go down, when a revote comes about, we know a heck of a lot more what the state is going to do with regard to the weighting study, with 173, with the yield numbers. Those will all be and I'm not sure about the dates, but it seems to me those would all be in much clearer focus when a revote came around, so that we could have a much clearer picture to paint for voters. So putting as much as we possibly can in the reserve fund now, so that if it does go down, we can move some of that reserve fund into reducing taxes to get the budget passed in the second vote, but also because we'll have a much clearer picture of what the state is going to do. Am I missing something?
Yeah, can I just clarify, Dave? You put equalized pupil spending and tied it to taxes. The yield is going to happen in between there, and that favorable yield, even with some of these numbers Patrick's showing, may still be a fairly advantageous tax move for our community.
And we'll get into some of the tax implications in a few slides.
Hold that back, because those are very different things. It's not a 6% increase to the tax. it's a 6% increase to the spending per pupil, which drives the tax, but it's being driven with a higher yield, which you'll see shortly.
And perhaps to your point, Dave, that 6 point whatever percent would show up on the ballot that people go and vote for. So it is an impactful figure in that way, that people see it when they go and check a box.
I get that. And Floyd's right, I think, which to me is the reason why to maximize what we could put into the education reserve fund and go for the 6 point whatever per pupil spending increase and see where we land. That's my initial thinking. I'm open-minded, but.
Yeah, Rob, I see your hand.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Sorry. I think I'm on- Yeah, I had a chance to scoot ahead on the presentation, so I want to touch to this point while we're still here. I'm going to be a Joe Manchin right now. I cannot vote put $870,000 into a buildings fund. When I look at that list of where our students need supports, that list did not include a building. So I would really encourage us to think differently about that number and shrink it, and to Dave's point, put money into the ed fund where we can support our students and teachers who desperately need it. I had a chance to read all of the thoughts on the thought exchange, and safety, mental health, appropriate staffing, training for our teachers was one of the most common themes out of hundreds upon hundreds of thoughts, and maybe one or two spoke to buildings. And so I know these numbers are very fluid, but that number right there sets a baseline in regards to what we're thinking about moving into the capital reserve fund. And I cannot support that much money with what our students and teachers need right now going towards buildings. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So now we're getting to some nitty gritties with the budget and really seeing what's the impact of using the 430 versus using the 0 in those two scenarios. So this slide shows you if we use 430,000 of the fund balance to offset taxes, this is what brings the cost per equalized pupil, that increase, into check with the board target of 5%. So overall spending, it's a 2.9% increase, and that's true whether we use the 430 or we use 0, because the spending isn't changing. What's changing is the revenue. So if we put that 430 into the revenue line, that brings our education spending down. So when we divide that into our equalized pupils, in this scenario, gives us that 4.99% increase over last year. And this may speak a little bit to your point, Dave. Last year, this year, we speak of it as last year, but it's really the year we're living in right now, was a 0.4% decrease in the cost per equalized pupil from the prior year. It was 4.6 before that and 8.1 before that. So that gives you a little bit of a historical perspective of where the increase in cost per equalized pupil has been as we think about what makes sense for FY23. And then, as we said, if we use $0 in that fund balance, it's still a 2.9% increase in overall spending, which is one of the figures that shows up on the ballot. And it's a 6.59% increase in the cost per equalized pupil, which is the other figure that shows up in the ballot, right? So those are the things that people would have in front of them as they're checking yes or no. And when we do the math on all this, again with a smaller revenue, because we're not putting 430,000 in, that increases our cost per equalized pupil and gives us that increase of 6.59%. And I think this seemed like the appropriate place to tackle another question that came out of the list from last week, which is what does a 5% look like in the context of building FY24? Because it is wise to be thinking about the year after next, because what we do for next year positions us to do something the following year. So as it stands right now, if we use that 430,000 thanks to a 6.32% increase anticipated in the spending threshold. And I should start by saying, I'm going to approach this from two different perspectives. One perspective is the spending threshold. That's what we became familiar with and became comfortable with, and it may return. So it's probably something we want to continue to be paying attention to in the event it does return. Another perspective is the cost per equalized pupil, and what that increase is, because that's what drives the tax rate, and that's what the board used this year to set a target. So I'm going to show you both perspectives as we think about next year's budget as it relates to building the following year's budget. So if we use the $430,000 to offset taxes, for FY23, we're under what would be the spending threshold by a little over $500,000. And for FY24, if we took all those personnel, this includes the $500,000 in personnel, roll all of that forward with all the assumptions that we have, that would put us over what would be the spending threshold by $865K, give or take. What I do want to point out here, as we're thinking about it in terms of spending threshold, there was legislation passed recently that allows school districts like us, and I would say there are probably not many, where construction spending that is not in the form of bond debt can be excluded from the spending threshold penalty. You still have to raise the taxes. You're still paying on the cost per equalized pupil, which drives the tax rate, but you're not also then paying the dollar for dollar penalty for everything that you're over. So we carry a little over $1 million in our budget for construction services. Presumably, nearly all of that would be eligible, and in this scenario, we could bring that FY24 under the spending threshold. So we wouldn't pay the penalty. Again, we'd pay to raise the funds to pay that cost per equalized pupil, but could likely avoid the penalty.
We don't have to pay for it twice.
We don't have to pay for it twice. If we look at what really isn't the 5% anymore, right? It's now the 6.59%. We would still be under the threshold for next year, but instead of the 850, I think it might have been, we're now at 1.29. So we would have to do something in addition to the construction to get us under. This is where who knows what's going to happen with the weighting study could play out. The earliest drafts we got of the weighting study showed 3 different scenarios. The sort of middle scenario had us losing equalized pupils that equated to about a $1.3 million ability to spend. The more recent models that came out put us somewhere between a neutral impact and being to the good about $1 million. So basically, the legislature has information that runs the gamut in terms of the impact on us. Recently, it's pointing to neutral to the good. If it ends up to the good, that could help address some of that other money that would put us over the threshold. And potentially, decisions could be made that start to impact efficiencies in FY24 depending on where we land. So there are a whole lot of moving parts as we think about FY24 that could help. And we're going to have some challenges that are putting us at a place where we would be over by 1.29. Important to note some assumptions in here as well. I mentioned an assumption that we have a 6.3% increase in the threshold, the spending threshold. If you recall, the most recent increase was 0.18%. So 6.3% is dramatically larger than the last increase we saw. I don't think it's wise to expect to see a 6.3% increase each year in perpetuity. So what this assumes is we have the 6.3 for next year and a 3% increase. We do think it's going to be a larger increase year over year going forward, given what we're seeing with NEEP and everything else. So this assumes a 3% instead of the 2.5% that we've used in years past as an assumption.
Steve has his hand up.
Steve?
I think it's important to draw NEEP to inflation, meaning the reason we're seeing the 6% increase is because inflation is what NEEP is being driven by. So if we project out with a 3%, which historically is a pretty accurate number, this is what happens. But if we receive a 6% increase in the threshold, it may feel like good news on the threshold that we can come up against, but it does mean our costs are rising at 6%.
Yep. Steve?
Is he muted?
I see that you're unmuted, Steve, but we still can't hear you. Andrew, do you mind just saying hi or something to see if there's any audio issue on our end?
You can hear me now?
Yeah, we have you. Okay.
Okay.
Might just be an issue Steve's having.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Now we have you, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. You basically answered all my questions with that last bit about the NEEP. And it also just sounded like somebody else on Zoom had their mic open.
That is because my microphones are very sensitive, so please don't have a conversation back and forth. Take turns so that I can mute us in this room.
All right.
Yep, there it is.
Okay.
Oh, I have a
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So I know a lot of our buildings have a lot of space, but when you add mental health people, you need private spaces for them to meet with kids. So for instance, there might need to be some spaces that are reconfigured for offices for that, or the breakout rooms that people are talking about. Because for instance, I'm sorry, we were having a conversation. Because I'm a little punchy right now. It's just that Christmas is in 5 days. I'm freaking out. Okay. So anyway, so I worked in this building when the TAG class was here, and I worked with those students. And my office, and granted there were a lot more students here then, was the library closet, which I'd love to actually, I missed the tour, but I'd love to go see it for old time's sake. And so I was meeting with the most emotionally challenged kids in the district in the library closet, and luckily there was a big bear in there they could sit on for a chair. So I just don't want any of the mental health practitioners here now, 40, well, how many years later, 20 years later almost, to have to do that. And so I want them to have the proper facilities. And I think I complained at the other meeting that one of my offices at one of the schools I work at is moving to the teacher's room after vacation because there's no other room. And now they're looking at, getting trailers next year, which is, where we used to be. So I just want to make sure that we do have money in the budget to reconfigure spaces for appropriate mental health services to be rendered, and also, timeout spaces or rooms for kids, because there are going to be some kids who need their own room most of the day. I mean, that's happening in all the schools I work at now, which is part of the reason I'm being moved. So that has to be thought in, so we can't just say we don't want to put money in there for improving spaces or creating, you have to have confidential spaces. You can't have the rooms with like this much room on top, you know what I mean? We have all that in a lot of schools. So I want that to be considered. So I don't think we can blanket say we don't want to put money towards capital improvements such as I'm describing, like just because that goes with adding mental health people in the building. And so, like I said, I will have my own coffee machine in my office because it will be in the teacher's room, and it's going to be fine. It's because everyone's adaptable. So if anyone wants some coffee.
But I think to your point, Kristen,
Yeah.
it's become an annual sort of dance we do each year to think about use of space and who goes where and how do we prioritize. And it can be tricky because sometimes people get used to whatever and they become possessive, and sadly, it's sort of one of the most challenging things that we do each year at the end of the year as we're thinking about needs for next year. But we have to have priorities.
And I would like anyone at the end of the meeting that wants to come down to the library to look at that closet with me. We made it work, but it was not optimal for therapy with children. So just I would prefer that no one is in that position moving forward, and there's enough planning and such so that people have enough space to do that work, because you need it. You can't just shove the people in the building without that kind of thoughtfulness. So thank you.
I can just kind of give you a highlight on that,
Yeah.
Kristen. So in our capital cash flow planning, For 23, we're looking at 350, for 24, 250, 25, 328, 26, $501,000 that's not allocated to the capital plan projects that we have in place, knowing that we're going to have to do some things.
Yeah.
So we haven't spent the 1.1 million down to the last penny to do some of those capital projects that our students need, our facilities need, but we've left enough on the table to be able to take care of those not yet identified needs.
Great. Excellent. Because that does have to do with how effective those services will be in some cases. Thank you.
Yeah, it hasn't been cost prohibitive yet to kind of repurpose a space. Like if we needed
retrofit or whatever.
because that's the hard part, right? We have a lot of space, but oftentimes it's a big room like this, right? So to make this whole room for a one-on-one conference space for a mental health provider uses a lot of real estate and maybe is too big to create the kind of environment that you want to have. So we have to continue to look at ways to kind of carve up the space we have in a way that works.
Yeah, that's great that you're aware of that. Thank you.
So Patrick or Floyd, could you help me understand this graph you have up? Because I was thinking that having a 6.59% increase would help us and we'd be in better shape in FY 24 and 25, and it looks like we'd be in worse shape. So what am I missing?
It's really because of the addition of the 500,000, and we're not offsetting any of that using the fund balance. It pushes us closer to the cost per equalized pupil that would be the threshold.
Coupling that with the declining enrollment.
Right. And that is the piece I mentioned before, that this assumes a 3% increase in the spending threshold. But you can see here, it doesn't look like that's a 3% increase. That's because we're projecting a pretty steep decline in enrollment between 23 and 24. We talked earlier about the hold harmless. So we expect the hold harmless to go away for 24, and that puts us, Floyd may be pulling it up, and I might have it somewhere else on here, but it's a pretty significant, actually, hang on. No, I guess I don't have it here.
I'm almost there.
But the drop in equalized pupil anticipated for 24 is significant because of the sunset of the hold harmless. And you have a combination of the hold harmless going away and continued decline in equalized pupils, as we talked about, as that decline in enrollment moves through the high school, and each of those students that are not enrolled at the high school anymore are weighted more heavily than when that drop worked through the elementary schools. We're going to see a steeper decline in equalized pupils given the drop in enrollment, and on top of that, loss of the hold harmless. So it's sort of basically FY24 is where we anticipate reality will catch up to us.
1395.
So I get that, but in the 5% increase slide, the previous slide, you had us over by 865 by. Is that because in the 6.5% increase you project in FY24 that we're not going to put any of that into reducing into the revenue side? Is that why it's over by 1 point whatever 1,000?
So the difference here is that 430K. So the 5% uses 430K, and it puts us 430K further below the threshold.
Yeah, but then in FY24, we have more money in the ed fund, that ed reserve, that we could reduce the budget by, so we should be over by less than 865K.
Right. So this doesn't assume anything with the fund balance in FY24.
Okay.
So making the assumption that we use 430,000 to offset taxes in FY23, I didn't carry that same assumption to 24. So this assumes $0 used in 24 to
Okay.
offset that.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
So now when we look at this from the cost per equalized pupil perspective, so we see what FY23 is and the difference there between using the 430 or not using any. We've talked about that. What we haven't really looked at that I thought was fair to consider tonight for the board was whether we add the 500K or don't add the 500K, right? So if we don't use any of the fund balance and we don't add the 500K for the positions that I've talked about, that would be a 4.73% increase. So basically, when we came to you in October, we said if we took all the people we have now, minus the 1 classroom at Lincoln and the 0.1 admin at Lincoln, rolled all of that forward, we thought we'd be around 4.7 or 8% increase, and that's what led to the board setting the target of 5%. So if we come back to that with all the updated figures and the iterations of the budget that have happened, which I'll say, Friday was feeling, Thursday was a super productive day, got a lot of questions answered, really worked through a lot of information. We had just gotten Thursday morning an equalized pupil count from Brad James at the AOE. We were running with it, feeling great. Friday morning, Floyd got an email from Brad saying, oops, that equalized pupil figure I gave you yesterday was wrong. It's actually 20 or 15 or some number of equalized pupils less than that. So I had to re-answer it. It changed the whole context of what made sense for building FY23. So Friday was redoing all of that, and today was redoing some more of it and polishing up the presentation. So it is today's figures that you're looking at, and tomorrow's figures might be a little different. So just an important reminder of that. But it seemed important to know, what if we don't add the 500K? That's not a foregone conclusion. So we see this here as well. Aaron?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there are any signs or indications that the threshold is going to reemerge, just because there really hasn't been any indication of that yet. Were you guys told it was going to come back, or?
So the indication we're working, there are multiple indicators, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. One indicator that's coming back is that it was specifically, the legislation was that there's a moratorium for 2 years. So presumably then after 2 years, it comes back. Having said that, among the recommendations in the weighting study, which really went even beyond weighting study, weighting formula changes, there are a lot of considerations raised in that weighting study. One of the recommendations was, I think, to prolong the suspension of the threshold for a few more years. I don't think it was forever, but a little while out. I don't recall how many years. So that's an indicator to the contrary, but the legislation right now was that it was, there's a moratorium for 2 years.
Okay, thanks.
And those two being the current year and next year. Or is that true, Floyd? Or is it next year and the year after?
Last year, this year, it's 22 and 23.
Okay, this year, next year budget.
I just had a process question. I was just thinking about, it's 8 now and where we're at in the presentation, and are we going to then talk about whether we want you to shift course or some, because that seems like it could take a while. So maybe.
Yeah, I think I can move through the rest of the slides. Yeah, I'm happy to move through the rest of the slides pretty quickly, because I would want some direction from the board tonight to say,
yes,
yeah, move forward with the 500K, or here's our thinking with what the fund balance should do.
Right.
Because that spending and revenue really is the direction I need so that we can work toward whatever potential adjusted target comes about from tonight.
And I'd like to be able to share the thought exchange data before we do that.
Yep. So I won't belabor this. You have it in hard copy and in digital, but you can see essentially the story here is if we use a lot of funds to offset taxes for FY23, and we don't continue to use those funds, that creates a drop in revenue, which assumes a sharp increase in the cost per pupil. That's why you see the 8% in FY24. Because of the loss of equalized pupils, because of the sunset of the hold harmless. And then if we don't have revenue that we had prior to that, that sort of double whammy puts you in the 8% again, which we've been historically. I think we passed budgets by 12 or 15 votes at that 8% mark. 14. And then it drops a bit in the years that would follow that. Obviously, lots of assumptions. Another question was, how do the ESSER funds fit into this with capital or education reserve funds? This sort of came to Liz's question earlier. So it's important to remember that ESSER funds are one-time funds. These are all one-time funds. ESSER helps pay for COVID-related expenses. We kind of have to answer that, if not for COVID, question as we think about using ESSER funds. ESSER funds can pay for personnel and they can pay for capital expenses with some caveats. In particular, we're thinking about outdoor classroom environments, HVAC, sanitization, those sorts of capital related expenses. And again, those funds effectively work through next year. They have to be spent by September or October of the following school year. Capital reserve fund, again, a one-time fund, can only be used for capital improvements, not staffing. As we said before, education reserve can be used for just about anything except capital improvements, but all should be thought of as one-time funds, which come with caveats. There's another question about would we need to RIF or take advantage of attrition to stay within that 5%, and the answer is no, and I think I even showed you how we can increase spending and use fund balance to stay at 5% if that's what the board wanted to do. In terms of taking advantage going forward and what are the consequences, I think the course of action in terms of taking advantage of attrition is once we had a direction, once there have been decisions made about where we're moving to in terms of the future of MAUSD, to then be thinking about using attrition as a way to get us there, as opposed to reductions in force, is the approved approach. How much we can take advantage of, obviously there's a lot to factor in and we see what presents, but that's kind of the thinking between RIF and taking advantage of attrition. So really getting down to the nitty gritty, if we didn't use any fund balance and had that 500K in, this is what we'd be looking at for tax rates. This also assumes a drop in the CLA, a pretty substantial drop. So we're using 95% of the current CLA to project this out. Property values are quite high right now, and we think that's going to produce a lowered percentage on the CLA. So we don't really know what it's going to be. Pretty common approach is to use 95% of the current to make some projections. And so that's what we're using. And again, we're using the more conservative of the two yields. And really where the rubber hits the road is in two ways. What's the change per 100,000 of assessed value for the third of Vermonters that pay that? And you can see it's pretty minimal. And again, this is using $0 of the fund balance. So even with using $0 fund balance, it's a decrease of 50 or 60 cents per 100,000 of assessed value. Essentially flat. Pretty good news in terms of what we could accomplish with this resulting tax rate. Entirely due to the yield. Right? This is driven by a very favorable yield, which again could be more favorable than what we're showing you tonight. And the impact that has on the 2/3 that pay based on income, again, still using the $0 of your fund balance, it's a drop of about 7%. When we compare that to using the 430K, so kind of playing out those two options, this is what it does to the tax rates, and really it boils down to $23 to $27 drop per 100,000 of assessed value, or an 8.4% drop for those that pay based on income.
Patrick, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just want to make sure I understand. So when you say using the 0 from the fund balance, that's still, and that, so I'm clear that 6.59% for FY23
Correct.
is still with the 500,000 you want to put in for
Correct.
increased positions.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
I know it's hard to believe, but that's true.
All right, that's why I was asking.
Yep.
And then if we don't use
It's all
fund,
about the yield.
right,
Exactly.
right, exactly. If you don't use the fund, because in essence that's meaning let's just keep the fund where it is.
Which fund are you referring to? There's the fund balance, there's the Ed Reserve Fund, the Capital Reserve Fund, and ESSER funds.
The whole fund balance.
Fund balance. Okay, gotcha.
Right, that 1.4.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, I might have missed this and I'm sorry. Does it have to be designated to one or the other, like now? I mean, do you have to decide how?
When we
you're gonna
adopt the
use it?
budget, yeah, because it's gonna have, where you designate it has an impact on the cost per equalized pupil.
Right, and that's that difference between the capital versus the ed spending.
And basically, unless you designate it for ed reserve or capital reserve, the default is to offset taxes, as I understand it.
Oh, is that right?
So if you said nothing on the fund balance, 1.4 million goes to offset taxes.
You can't just leave it in our checking account. It won't last.
The challenge with, if we played that out, if you left all 1.4 million to offset taxes, that means anything less than 1.4 million that we apply the following year is a decrease in revenue, which is going to increase your tax rate.
Right, but by earmarking and putting in the budget, we're saying we're spending it. It's not going back.
Right, so we're saying, hey, we have this found money that's already been paid for that we can do some things with and not have to pay interest on. So we're going to put it in some fund so that we can use it in that way.
Okay.
So I'd like to comment on a couple of things. One is I feel that we need to keep as much in reserve to deal with the loss of ESSER funds and the possible reinstatement of the threshold and the possible work that the legislature might do around the poverty weighting. All of these things could adversely affect us, and to leave us bare and then asking taxpayers to pay, a 10 or a 15% tax increase in a given year to absorb all of those possible negatives. I think we really smart to carry every penny of our surplus forward without using any of that revenue in 23. And I would also like to push back on Rob a little bit in that we neglected our buildings by and large, particularly Mount Abe, but also to some extent the elementary school buildings for decades. And it resulted in 2 efforts to pass a bond to make the school building usable. Now, the argument can be made that they were a little too much full of frills that weren't necessities. And the district has made substantial gains by using the $1 million a year to deal with critical needs in our buildings, one of which is the roof. And if we can do that roof and put solar panels on it, or other for the elementary school buildings become more energy efficient, that's savings for cost savings for taxpayers for decades to come. And so we need safe and healthy buildings as much as we need safe and healthy kids. I completely support the 500,000 for increased staffing to do just that. And if more is needed, so be it, because your calculations just showed if we do that, if we put increase our revenue by 0 using reserve funds, we're still going to have a tax decrease for our citizens, even with a projected substantial change in the CLA. And so let's move forward and put as much as we can in reserve funds, because we know that we have a crisis coming in 2 or 3 years. And let's be prepared to make that a gradual slope rather than a shock. Thanks.
Brad?
Yeah, thanks. Patrick, I think that, I really appreciate, your presentation tonight. I think that it's very helpful. I mean, my sense is that, big picture, that despite some of the dismal projections with respect to enrollment and that sort of thing, the overall budget picture doesn't look all that bad. I'd like to bring in, just as a comment, with respect to my sort of, role in the study committee. And, this is a small sample, but there's a great deal, it seems to me, as a result of the community input that the study committee has, undertaken, there's a great deal of elasticity with respect to, taxes. By and large, most of the folks that, who, weighed in on the study committee, sort of, proposals said that the costs associated with expanding programs would be, sort of, would justify tax, increases. So I think that, moving forward, I'm not sure that sort of some of the assumptions that have been made about, how much, tax, how much the increase in taxes the community could absorb are accurate. I think there's a whole lot of elasticity in that respect. And I just sort of offer that as a comment.
John, another question? Sure, Sandy.
Thanks. On the education reserve fund, and this might be to Floyd as well. Again, I apologize if you guys all know this already, but is that something that has to be spent in a specific year, or can it be rolled?
Savings account.
So when David mentioned, like, if we put more there, it's not, you don't have to spend it, you can just choose when you need it and it's still designated.
As the board dictates with those funds.
Gotcha. Oh, that's right, and then we've done that in the past, that's right. Okay, so David was saying maybe more towards education reserve fund, maybe less towards capital. I was trying to, I don't know, because I'm wondering how to divide that number 870, and the 549, and does
So I'll peel back the onion on the 870. That's a number we backed in to get us all of these projects funded with a little bit of inflation factor and leaving, I think, $500,000 in our capital reserve fund at the end, which Ms. Warden wants us to spend on a new science room at the high school. So, we'll see if what happens to it. But so the prudence of that is the 870 of those dollars is the front end of getting those projects done.
Yeah, and that's the idea, right? Is the 870 is what's needed to, over the next few years, do the lobby, do the roof, do the energy upgrade. If we don't put 870 in, we run the risk of not getting to do one of those projects. The lobby's moving forward because we're already in the pre-qualification stage, like that ball's rolling because that's going to get started this spring. So we would then be looking at, does the roof not get done or the electrical upgrade not get done? And really the 500K is what we hope to have at the end of this. But when we're talking about millions of dollars in projects, the margin for change in cost could eat up a chunk of that 500,000 too. So that 500,000 starts with sort of an insurance policy that we can get these important projects done. And hopefully we're in good shape afterwards and can do something more.
And does the capital reserve fund have the same as the ed reserve? It's like a savings account. Does it have to get spent? I mean, you can't take it out of it, but it's for that specific purpose.
Under that capital
Right.
savings account, the board doesn't get to decide whether or not they can spend it. What they can do is go to the community and ask the taxpayers, can we spend it?
But it has to go towards capital though, because it was
Has to
put
go
in
towards capital.
that.
And the advantage of this structure is the next year. So if at the end of the year next year, we have the good fortune to have made good decisions, the heat costs went down, we saved a few nickels, and we've got $750,000 of fund balance. If we funded the capital plan correctly, then those dollars can go entirely into the ed reserve fund. We don't need to allocate them.
Oh, part of the regular budget.
Going
I mean, part of the
forward,
regular
correct.
budget can go where
Correct.
it needs to go.
Right.
Versus this specific.
In the same way that last year there was a surplus, the previous year there was a surplus. Some years better than others. And I would say that we watch our nickels, we watch our pennies in the hopes of getting to the end of the year with some dollars that we can be impactful with.
And remind me, as part of the regular budget, does it still have that sort of 1 million
Yes.
earmarked?
Yes, and that's part of the cash flow using between 550 and 750 of that annually towards the capital plan,
Right.
leaving between 250 and 500 for the other plan, the other stuff that we have to capitalize.
But there's more flexibility. It's not, it doesn't have to be spent
Right,
there
once
versus this. Okay.
once the community votes for that to be used, we can use it in that year. If we don't use it, then it rolls into this conversation with what do we do with it.
Okay.
And I think in this budget, that million is actually 1.2,
Okay.
because part of what we want to try to do is to get the same amount of work done, we need that amount to increase at the inflation rate that we see for construction services. So typically construction is 5 to 7%. I wouldn't say we're in typical years when it comes to construction costs, they're probably higher. So we're not quite probably keeping up, but it's an effort to try and keep up with the cost increases in the field.
And it reflects a number of years of a flat million without increasing it.
Right.
So we are playing some catch up there.
So my last question is, and I think it may have come out, is does this allow us flexibility if there should be some like unexpected things that come out of either the, what we're doing with Nate Levinson together with the merger study? Like, do we still have some, it still allows for flexibility if there should be something that comes from that?
Having the combination of the capital reserve and the ed reserve gives you a lot of flexibility, because those are both one-time funds that are outside of the budget. They have different processes in how to access them, but they do offer flexibility. And it's worth noting, 4 years ago, these were both at zero.
Oh, the funds were.
So
Okay.
and actually they didn't exist.
Okay.
So we created them and funded them both. And now they have the potential, depending on where we are tonight, or where we go forward with this budget, to have a pretty solid amount in them to give options to respond when things that are unexpected. You can plan on how to spend them, and you can respond in unexpected events as well.
Okay, thank you.
And one other small point on those reserve funds, they're not accessible to us on an annual basis. It has to be the board, either through the community in a vote or the board voting. It's not money that is available for an annual expenditure without the board pulling the trigger.
Okay. Thank you.
Krista? I was just wondering if we might look at the input from the community, if we're about ready to get into discussion about, like a little more discussion about additional guidance for Patrick.
So the thought exchange?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Is everybody, that sound good, everyone? Okay. And Patrick, could I share my screen?
Sure.
I did just join the Zoom. Do you need to give, I see the button, maybe I can just do it.
There. I just made you co-host, so you should be able to do it now.
Okay.
And Krista, you have a mic or one of those things you can wear there too.
Okay.
So that.
Do I need to turn it on? Is it on?
Put it on.
Yep.
I can hear you just fine, Krista.
Pull it like this.
Yep.
It's for us, Andrew. So
Yep.
pull it
Oh,
up.
okay.
So pull,
Yeah.
see the tab underneath? Underneath here, there's a tab.
This,
There,
the little
yep.
flat.
And then
Yeah.
the button down at the very bottom is big. There you go. No. Is it on? Talk.
Can you hear me?
No.
Push the button maybe.
Press it again.
Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me?
There it is. No, sorry, no, it didn't.
I
Do you
usually have
need
to
me to
hold
do
it
it?
down.
They can hear me okay.
No, they could because it was on. I think it's off.
Oh, there you go. That one looks like it's on.
Yep.
There you go. So like he's really
pretty.
Can you hear? Ooh,
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. All right, so we did our thought exchange, which was great. Big shout out to the folks that helped with looking at the data. The good news is that while this is great software, it turns out that people still matter in terms of interpreting the results. So we are not yet obsolete, but it was a great tool to get to know more. So this was the question that we posed, and we did this Monday of last week and closed it Saturday at midnight. So folks had just under a week to do it. And so just sharing some of the results. So we had 431 folks participate, and of those, they shared 727 thoughts. So you could go in and view thoughts, you could go in and share your own thoughts, you could go in and rate thoughts, or you could do all three of those. And so there were 15,472 ratings of those 727 thoughts. So that gives us a participant ratio that's pretty high for an exchange this size. So at least according to the thought exchange folks, they were pretty impressed with that. So go us. This is the demographic breakdown. So the largest group were family members of current students, followed by community members. I should say people could choose more than one category. So this doesn't add up exactly to the number of people that participated. And then we had staff members, and then students, and then some board members. And a couple of folks that I think with the thought exchange, they were going in and helping, so they show up as the other. So this is a thought bubble that shows you some of the key phrases and how often they were represented. This was generated by the computer. It wasn't generated by us. So, you know, it's choosing what to pull out, but it's frequency of words that we see. But really what's more important is the actual thoughts themselves. And when you look at some of those, what we did, this group of us, including Liz and Nancy Cornell and Joan Holiday and Eugenie Doyle and Moncton, stepped up and helped us do a really fast turnaround of theming all of the thoughts, those 400 and something thoughts. And we came up with 15 broad categories for them. And I'm going to show you all those and the thoughts within those categories in a few minutes. But I just wanted you to be able to see first the themes by, what is that top word? By the total number of thoughts. Okay, so the categories we came up with were, and again, the question is thinking about this next budget cycle, what should our priorities be? So student support services, curriculum and programming, staffing, safety, communication, transparency, and trust, equity and inclusion, support for teachers and staff, facilities use, improvement of facilities, maintaining local schools, and collaboration between administrators and staff, between and among, within. So this you can see of the themes, these are the order of, their order in terms of the number of thoughts. The next slide will show us how those themes were actually rated. So you can rate each thought on a scale of 1 to 5. You'll see most folks were pretty generous in their ratings. I think Nancy commented, like, maybe next time I would give a few 1s or 2s if I thought about it. But so there's not huge variation, but you can still see that the order of the values or the themes changes a little bit when you look at the rating scores. So a thought that might have been mentioned multiple times was not necessarily rated as high. I mean, all of this is going to be linked and shared to folks, so you can pore over this a little more later. This is a bunch of unnecessary, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry, you'll get all the really juicy stuff. Okay, what is this one? Oh yeah, that's what I already did. Okay, so I think that's the last of the actual presentation. What I want to show you now is the data. Because our group decided that it was really important for everybody, especially for board members, to really get a chance to see all of the thoughts There are many, but it shouldn't take more than an hour or so to read them. And then also, this will be available to anybody in the community that wants to view them. So this first screen shows you every thought that was shared, and then each tab below shows you the thoughts by theme. So you can look at what kinds of things came up under the Maintain Local Schools theme, or under professional development, or under safety, and read through and see both where that thought ranked in terms of all the thoughts. So the safety tab, the number one thought, overall 400 and so, was this one here, this very first one. But then it'll also show you the rating that it received. And you'll also see that for some thoughts, we put them into a couple of different themes. You could only choose 2 themes out of the 15 for each thought. So we spent time today working together to talk through a couple of places where we weren't certain, is this the right theme or not the right theme? We did this, again, it was a really fast turnaround, so if we'd had more time, I think we would have maybe had more opportunity to discuss the categories and what fell within them. But I think we did a pretty good first pass.
What's column C again, Krista?
Column C is the theme that thought.
Oh, not D, I mean C.
Oh, sorry. C is the ranking of the thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Having seen one of these before, sometimes things that are written first are ranked different, are ranked more, like more people read it. And then some people see that it's been read, so then more people read it.
Yeah.
And then weight it. So I always,
I
think that's a really interesting perspective on.
Yeah,
It seems like it's good, but it's also could be really skewed based on perspective.
So we talked to the Thought Exchange folks about that, and they shared with us some of the algorithms that are used to try to ensure that thoughts that are newer still get seen by folks along with some of the older thoughts. There's a diversity of thoughts that are pulled. So what you might see when you first go in is going to be different than what Kristen would see, and would be different than what I would see. So yeah, and they mix it up in terms of kinds of thoughts as well. So they try to make sure it's a range. So you're not going to just see everything about safety. If that's getting the highest ratings, you're still going to see thoughts that are different from that. A couple of different kinds of algorithms that do that, but it sounds like they're thinking about that.
Thank you.
But it's not perfect. So again, definitely reading all the thoughts is really important.
You can send us the spreadsheet.
Yep, so this will be linked to the minutes, and I'll make sure that board members have this. But since we're going to be talking now about guidance for this next phase of the budget development, I think that maybe if Liz wants to share a little bit, and I could share a little bit, and Rob, I know you looked through some of the thoughts, and I could stop sharing my screen if folks would like, because that's stressing, or I could keep it up. But just sort of our general impressions of what we saw as we look through the data. I don't know if you want to go first, Liz.
I was encouraged by reading all of the notes. It felt like it really lined up with my understanding of our community, and that it really wanted us to focus on making sure that kids had access to education. So that meant whatever it might be that they saw that was in the way of that access. So services, programming, all of that support. So I appreciated that about it.
Rob, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's a great tool that I hope we continue to utilize as a board. I had a chance to sort of pick through the dashboard, and to Sarah's point also that you can actually see the number of times that a thought was actually given a star rating, so you can sort of compare. So you know that span, I looked, there are a couple of thoughts that must have been added like at the bell, if you're not like late Saturday night, that actually didn't get a rating. But the range from, thoughts is like 28 times, I think, to down to the low 20s. So that algorithm seems to do a pretty, I guess, great, okay job to make sure that every thought is at least shown to someone, more than just the person that put the thought in, and tries to find some, I guess, equity or equality there. I would really recommend board members reading the thoughts and not just necessarily looking at the starred numbers per se, but just seeing there is a big swath there of input, and I just think it's a great tool that I hope we continue to utilize and tweak, and to have that much feedback within a really short time period, I think is pretty wonderful. And as we've discussed as a board, like how do we better, incorporate more feedback from more community members? We can always do better, but I think this is a great tool for us to use moving forward. And my comment earlier was really driven, having spent 2 hours reading every comment that was put forth in regards to thinking about, where money should be spent. And I really, again, emphasized, I think we should put that money towards our education reserve fund based off of these comments. And if we move into next year and we have leftovers, let's put that money towards capital fund, because our teachers and our students, they need help. And I think that's the best use of what I saw in this tool from the 400 people that participated.
Great. Could I get permission to just ask, since Joan and Nancy are here, if they would like to add anything else? Joan, do you want to add anything else about your experience with the tool or with the survey since you're here?
Yes, but it's going to take me about a second. So I really appreciate, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So I really appreciate Krista's presentation tonight. Highlighted the sort of strengths and weaknesses of this program. And I think the most useful part of it was getting the actual thoughts themselves. The system has the method of allowing people to rate them or rank them. And there was a pretty good algorithm to make sure that all were seen equitably. But my message to the board is that there was an emotion and communication in even the lowest rated thoughts, and all of them merit a reading. So I hope the board will value the thoughts more than the software. And when Eugenie and I were discussing this, I'm going to quote her, and she said, "This platform, in my opinion, while interesting, may produce documents more attractive and deceptively simple than deeply perceptive." And so a huge shout out to Krista for presenting the actual thoughts themselves rather than the beautiful PowerPoints that could have been provided. So it's really important that the board read all of the thoughts. So thank you very much, Krista.
Yeah, thanks for your help.
Thank you, Joan.
Nancy?
Yes, I agree very much with what Joan also had to say. Because of when we started this and how little time we actually had to get people to respond, I mean, the response rate overall is very low compared to how many people could possibly have responded. So, I mean, I don't think we're at a point with this tool where the board can use the aggregation of results or the ratings to make decisions about the budget that that you're going to be deciding on. But I do think the individual ideas that are in each response will give you some ideas about what questions to ask and what possible ways to emphasize
key ideas in what you put in the budget. So I would caution you not to really pay any attention to the ratings. And one example of why you shouldn't is that we learned a lot by looking at the data about what we'll do next time in terms of giving directions. And just for example, and Krista alluded to it a minute ago, when I was rating other people's thoughts, I decided, well, everybody's thoughts are really important. So I'm gonna skip any question that I either don't understand, any thought that I don't understand, or I'm not that wild about. I'm not gonna give it a 1. I'm just gonna skip it. And so the way I rated was people, I rated things either a 5 or a 4, or once in a while a 3. But not everybody did it that way. And so we don't really know what the ratings mean at this point. So I think the actual thoughts and the rationale behind the thoughts, that's rich information and really worth looking at as you make decisions about what questions to ask about the budget and where you want the budget to go. But I do think the tool is going to be, the more we use it and the more we understand it, the more it's going to be, very useful. And I understand that in the Champlain Valley District, they start asking questions using this tool and they start asking questions about the budget like in September. So, we can really use this and plan out over time how to use it well.
Thank you.
So we didn't really add an action item to give direction, but I think if we have a general consensus, we want to give Patrick to lead him on where he's going to continue working with the budget. Krista?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is that I think, well, I don't get my notes because it might be more than one thing. So I totally agree with putting all of the funds in reserve in our fund balance. I do also think that we need to have safe and sound and positive learning structures for our students, as well as having staff and support within those structures. And I trust that the decision about how much to put in the capital reserves and how much to put in the ed reserves is well informed. But I guess what I'm wondering is about the $500,000 in addition, like that's not coming from the fund that you're proposing for an increase. And I know in general, we're pretty fiscally conservative and we have a nice fund balance. And I would just say that I would support that if there's any thought, even a little more would be better, that I would support that. I think that we see just the budget.
Oh, just the budget.
So, I think our funds are really important for our sustainability, both of our facilities and our other things that might come up. But I know Patrick said proposed $500,000 in addition. And I'm just thinking about, the yield and our estimates and our generally pretty conservative nature, which I think makes good sense. But I also think we're recognizing that we're understaffed in certain areas. And, I just want to make sure that we're not being too conservative with what that looks like. So I guess those are my general thoughts.
Is that, Steve?
So Patrick, I was thinking back to your, can you hear me?
all over.
Coming in clean.
All right, sorry, I wanted to make sure this time. Just going back to your classroom size slide for a minute. It looked like some of the things we thought might start to happen when declining enrollment was being realized, real enrollment was being realized in the schools, that eventually you start to have to combine classrooms and combine ages. And that isn't always a seamless process where you can end up with a nice cozy 12 to 15 kids per classroom. We're bumping up against some 21s and higher averages. And I'm curious if some of this money could be used to break some of those classrooms up, if the room is available in the school that they're in, as a bridge to the consolidation as well, where, in addition to spending money on, social supports, spending money on maybe reducing some of the larger class size averages.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the short answer is yes, money could be spent to do that. That isn't what I would recommend we spend money to do. We don't have, our class sizes, typically speaking, are not gigantic class sizes. And again, I think that I would put that money to other supports first. And we don't have any 3-grade combinations planned for next year, even with what you see here. 2 grades, yes, but not 3.
Was his point to add additional staff beyond the 5 to 6, or allocate some of the 5 to 6 additional staff to do this? I wasn't quite sure.
No, I think I was just contemplating, what Krista was saying about adding more money to the 500,000. I agree that the social supports are critical. I was just thinking that, we do have some money in the education reserve right now, and it might be possible if we're seeing that we're going to be bumping up against, running into some 25s, 21.6 being an average. What's the worst out of the average? Are we pushing 25 or 30 in a case or two, where it would really be beneficial, in a spot location here or there where we need to get past a bulge somewhere that we can't see in the detail at the moment, by breaking a classroom up and investing in another classroom.
Then, Rob?
Yeah, it's a question to sort of piggyback off of Steve's, and I know we didn't get enough votes on it from the board at our last meeting, but I think to Steve's point, and another way to see that number, and I know this would take a lot of time, but and it fluctuates, is what does it look like on the ground when you look at equalized pupil numbers? Because a student, a classroom of 20 students in one building could be a much different number in another, even though they're both 20 students, depending on if they're equalized pupils. And that's, I would love to see that as a board member. I think it could maybe help us decide where we might want to put an extra person, possibly, if all things being equal, one classroom actually comes out at 30 equalized pupils and the other stays at 20. That's just something I've thought about, and I know that varies classroom to classroom, year to year, probably week to week, possibly, but I think maybe that could get to some of the needs that I feel like some of our students in classrooms might have.
So I'm wondering, in order to keep moving this along, because we're running out of time, can I take a temperature take? Are members in support of the notion of adding funds to the budget? Patrick said 500,000 to facilitate adding positions to support student mental health, safety, and intensive needs. Is that a thumbs up? Is that?
At least.
Yes.
At least. Okay. All right. And the notion of stretching the ed reserve funds, is that appeal? Does that appeal?
A or B, is that what you're asking?
A or B could be a good way to go about it.
Yeah.
That would be helpful to me.
All right, so, all right, let's look at option A. Who's in, I want to see, option A is uses $430,000 to offset taxes and stays at 5% per equalized pupil. It leaves 119,316 to add to the ed reserve fund. Thumbs up or thumbs down for some direction, Patrick?
Do you want to read what option B is? They have their
I think they're.
They got it.
All right, so option B, use $0 to offset taxes, resulting in a 6.59 increase per equalized pupil. This leaves 549,316 to the ed reserve fund. How do you feel about that one?
Yes to part one, sideways to part two.
All right, so is that enough to give you some work? All right.
Can I just add one part? Again, I hear that there's flexibility with the ed reserve funding, Patrick, and so, you know, I see that as probably a place for flexibility to be seen. And I think I understand why the 870 for the capital reserve fund based on possible spending thresholds in the future, I think was what you showed us, right? In the graph, kind of above spending threshold, below. And I don't know if it'll make any difference or not, but I am curious to know, just, does it make sense, any more sense to put some more in the ed funding? You know, maybe not as much in the capital? I just put that out there because, you know, I hear about sort of people's concerns about should we be doing a little bit more? And we can do it through the budget, but maybe we also have something out there if something should happen and COVID gets worse for all we know. I mean, I don't know, right?
I guess the way I think about it, I'm not at all opposed to more money in the ed reserve. I think the ed reserve in some ways offers greatest flexibility. I'm concerned if we don't do some of these major projects, in particular the roof and the electrical, right? If the roof at Mount Abe fails, how much we have in the ed reserve isn't going to matter because we're going to have to find a new home for 650 kids immediately. And that will create big problems, and that's going to exacerbate the challenges that we're experiencing now. Likewise, if the electrical system fails, we're going to be in the same boat. So I wouldn't want to jeopardize the continued use of Mount Abe as a facility in favor of putting another 100,000 or 200,000 in the ed reserve.
Got it. And do we have a past report on the roof that we from a prior board meeting, or?
We do. I don't remember if it was, if the
I didn't
report was
quite
shared
hear
in
the
the prior.
question.
Do we have a
meeting.
prior, like, facilities report about the roof and its need? Like, I
We
feel
do.
like was it in a board meeting? 2 years ago.
I think it was a couple of years ago, we had something in there, and now we've got some numbers tied to it, and we've used an inflationary figure. We did do a patch to it that our contractor says that we can sleep well at night with hitting the timeline that we want with the patch that we were able to do and the fixes that we did this past summer.
I could probably find it somewhere.
Probably
I'll
on the
look for it as
facilities
well.
page. I would start there looking on that because it
If I
probably
can't
was
find it,
a
I'll.
part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna keep us moving on. And Hannah is here with us, and she has been a real trooper, so thank you for putting up with us,
Should she put
Hannah.
on her
Yes.
special microphone?
Yep. So I'm gonna let Hannah give her community council update for everyone, and then I have a question for the board after they've heard from Hannah.
Abby's online too.
Oh, Abby's online too? Great.
Yes, Abby's here. I'll start us off and then Abby, you can feel free to add on. But, so, last meeting, I gave an update about what's been going on in community council. since last meeting, we have voted down the proposal of the national anthem, which I linked in the last blurb. You can look at if you want more information. We had a lot of conversation about how to move forward as a school, and ultimately it just came down to that. So that's one thing that we did. We also approved a proposal to make the month of May officially recognized as Asian American Pacific Islander Month every year, and that's a really great step forward. So yeah, and I'll let Abby give one more little update.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, and so then one other thing, we're always looking for community representatives, just members of the 5 towns who would be willing to come to our meetings and give their perspectives as community members and what have you. And so if you know anyone who's interested, feel free to send them our way. And Hannah, if you can't think of anything, I think that's everything we had to say.
I think so.
All right. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Are there any questions for that? Can I just say something? Thank you for your work. And also, the play was awesome, and you both were in it. So anyone that missed it, they really missed something awesome. So good job. Very well done. And thank you for doing that. For both things. And everything else you both do. So thank you.
So now, board members, we are almost at 9 o'clock. The next 2 items are update, which were not updated. They were the links from the last meeting. They're still pertinent, but they were not updated. So, and then we have 2 monitoring reports and a brief discussion. What would you like to do?
Santa comes early, we adjourn.
I second that.
Is that what you're asking?
It's going to require either we plug on or we can table, and we're going to have a meeting mid-January. I had to think about what month it was. And because Nate's coming to our meeting at the end of the month, we're going to try and get as much taken care of at the earlier January meeting. We could address what we don't tonight, but at some point we have to catch up. So it's up, we can have, if you want to, you can make a motion to table the remaining board management and governance items, and we can work on them at the next meeting.
Can we tackle one of them and put the other one off?
It's up to the group. What would you like to do? How about
take her home either way, so I won't vote. But I'm gonna take her.
Okay.
I'd say give it 15 minutes. Let's do what we can in 15 minutes and then adjourn.
Okay. Is everybody game for that? 15 minutes and then?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so as I said, the updates were provided in written form. The next action is to accept the monitoring report for 3.2 accountability of the superintendent.
So moved.
I'll
Steve
second.
And Andrew. Okay, any discussion? All right. Hang on, I just need to ask you a couple of questions. So, based on the information provided, does the board find that the interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Based on the information provided, does the data demonstrate the accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. All right, all those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 3.2 accountability of the superintendent, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. All right, moving on to another action item to accept the monitoring report for 4.4 school board chair's role. I do have worksheets from members submitted at the last meeting. So is there a motion to accept that monitoring report?
I so move.
Sandy?
I'll second, Andrew.
Andrew? Okay. Rob, we waited for you to be here in case there were any questions. That's why it's on the agenda.
By the way, I thought it was a great report. Very, very thorough. Thank you.
Yep, well done.
I just have a couple of things I want to be sure, because I realized at the last meeting that Sandy was looking back through past monitoring reports, and I just wanted to check on a couple of things. There was a document you shared, Rob, about the requesting an agenda item, and it's different than the one that was presented in the monitoring report from the agenda planning that Sarah McLean did last year. And so I just wondered if you can get a copy of the document that Sarah put in there, because that's the one I've been sending out to people when they request an agenda item. I've been using that one, and it looks different than the one you have in the report.
Yeah, I can try to dig it up. That's what I was able, I think, find via, an archive search. So I might have gone too far back in the archives, but I know what you're talking about. And if I can't find it, I'll reach out to her. But I know it's out there. Sounds
I think
good.
Liz has the sharing rights on that, because Sarah wasn't able to give me permissions, but she could give Liz permission. So I think Liz has the results, or the document.
I'll send it to you, Rob.
Thanks, Liz.
Okay, and then on page 4, you wrote something in parentheses, and I just wanted clarity on what that meant. You wrote, though their voice is not always shared. And I didn't have clarity, so I'm wondering, I just wanted to know what that meant.
Hold on.
And Don, while he's looking, the request for an agenda item, is that a document that we can put like right at the beginning of the folder on the drive?
Yep, I can make a note and try and get that.
Yeah, just nobody should have to search for it. It should be right there when you walk in the door.
Okay.
Hold on. Sorry. I'm trying to find where exactly you're referencing. Page 4 here.
It's not numbered.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I think that was just my personal reflection on the fact that, in 2 years that I've been on the board, I feel like there's been a lot of conversations where it's been crickets, unfortunately, when I think people should share what they have to say. That's why I've really appreciated the small group sessions, because I think it gives people maybe, I don't know if the word safer is appropriate, but a space where people share their voice. That's me though, and I obviously wrote that as a board. I'll be totally fine to remove it. It was a reflection that I've had, that I appreciate when I hear other people's, opinions, even though they may differ than mine. I think that's our duty. So that's why I put it in there.
Okay. And then on page 5, I just want to clarify something you wrote, just in the future, if somebody else is reading it. You said something about the feedback from Nate and his group was not, let me go to that page. It's on page 5. Page numbers are helpful. Counted the wrong page. Where is it? Oh, so feedback from K-12 Solutions. Advise the chair and the board to clarify 1, policy 4.5 board members code of conduct, clarify understanding of individual rights versus group responsibility. Their advisement was more around to acknowledge for the board to acknowledge the commitment to withhold judgment. That's where they said to us, Nate and his team said, it could go a long way for us to have some sort of action. So just thinking about somebody reading this when we're not here to explain it so that it tells the story. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll gladly, I can amend, no problem. I hear what you're saying. I'm just reading it real quick, and it is not very clear if you weren't in the room. That's for sure.
That's all I was thinking when I heard Sandy say how she went back and read them all. I thought, oh, it's probably really important that we have it accurately reflect what happened so that.
Totally. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It is, yeah.
Okay. So based on the information provided, does the board find that the interpretation is reasonable? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Does the board find that the data demonstrates the accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes?
Yes.
Or no? All right. Okay. All those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 4.4 school board chair's role, and Rob said he'd make those amendments, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstention? Okay. All right. How are we doing on time, Andrew?
6 minutes.
We've got 6 minutes left. We're doing great.
All right.
Whoa.
Okay. So next item was meeting mechanics. Here we go.
All victories.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
This will only take 3 minutes.
okay, 3 minutes. Let's see. So the first question was, with the COVID numbers changing and everything, this model of part in on Zoom and in person is a challenge. So I wondered and Krista and I talked, we wondered whether we want to commit to either all in person or all in Zoom if the numbers keep growing. And if we agree to that, to be all in Zoom, we have to designate, because the law no longer exists that allows us to be remote, we have to designate a space, and somebody has to be in that physical location, so we should all take turns.
So I would suggest that that's what we do, because if we go all in person and decide to do that, and then folks get symptomatic and stay home, then I would imagine we would have trouble having a quorum.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. I'm very concerned about COVID spread, especially with grandkids and family visiting, and I don't want to give it to other people, and I don't want to get it.
Okay. All right.
I just think as we say that, I mean, school is live and in person, so, I mean, is there gonna be a switch there too? You know, I mean, I hope not, right? But I always feel like if teachers and kids have to go in, that, I mean, I agree with what everyone's saying, but just on the other side, they also have to go in every day and do stuff, and so should we, if they're in, and just continue to do this for people that are comfortable. I don't think is it that difficult? Is it that much of a yank to do this?
It is slower because because we're dealing with the technology piece and problems with the technology, and so there is that. And
I guess I would also just add that I think, I mean, we're in unprecedented times, so maybe we do need to be more flexible. But I think as we're trying to foster our group dynamics, it's really hard for me, especially when we're trying to do the small groups, but in general, we don't have the same level of dialogue when we're not. Like if we're all on Zoom, it's sort of equal, or if we're all here, it's equal, but it feels less equal to me. And that just might be my own thing, but another thing that Dawn and I have been talking about trying to do more of are those smaller discussions. So that definitely is harder with hybrid as well. And it would be virtually impossible if we're all remote, but I don't know. I guess I vote for one or the other. The hybrid, I'm not a fan of.
I certainly wouldn't want people to come to meetings if they're not comfortable.
Well, we're gonna need to keep the Zoom interface anyway, because I mean, unless I'm mistaken, I think we're getting much better public participation in the meetings because there's a Zoom tool for people to use. So even if it's just for the public to be able to attend, the tool is very useful. And you know, I would be there tonight. I just didn't have the choice. So it was just, and it was a game time decision. And sometimes that happens. But that's the beauty of the flexibility of the thing. So I don't know what to say.
In past years, when people couldn't attend, do we have trouble getting quorums, or, with this size of a group? I don't know. I just wonder what it was like before the advent of Zoom meetings. And then my other thought was just like I have a child in quarantine, and so I pretend like my family is, right? And so, that gets tricky too. And Zoom has been great for me to have that flexibility to still be here and present, but not there. So I just wonder about that as well.
So
I mean, I think we should, try to meet in person, but to give up the flexibility of having the Zoom alternative, I'm not sure how that helps anything, because it allows, fuller participation for individual meetings when, a board member can't be there in person. I don't think it should be an either or.
all right, Sandy, did you?
I'm okay with continuing the way that it is for now until we reach a time where even as a school, certain things change. I'm kind of with Kristen's comment, the kids have to go, they have to be there in person, but I do want to keep it still open. I do realize there are challenges. I want to commend that the setup today has been pretty amazing with the audio and the sound because of the way it's set up. So I felt a much better communication with our board members because I can hear them so loud and clear. So that does make a difference, because I felt like they were just sitting right next to me. Mm-hmm. So I have no problem with people staying remote for safety reasons. Like, absolutely. I think that if a board member prefers to stay remote and some come in person, that makes absolute sense for each person's individual needs, until we think that in person is no longer safe, I guess is where I'm sitting.
Patrick?
One other thought I might just put out there. First, I want to commend Sean. I think the work that he has done to help facilitate the hybrid is the only reason it works as well as it does, and I think it works really well. And I'll follow that up with, if he can't be here, I think we should make it all remote. Because I think the meetings when Neat TV couldn't be here, we struggled to make it work well. And I think it would work better in those circumstances if everybody was Zooming and we had a physical location. It can be central office. I would be there anyway, so I could be the person who's there, if that helps.
Yeah, that's the way the Career Center runs it. The superintendent basically sits in the conference room and we all Zoom in.
Well, we will practice, what is it, a habit of mind, thinking flexibly.
And we may be a month later from now and it could change.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So we're staying.
We're gonna stay like this, in person if you can, and if not, you Zoom, and maybe Krista and I can brainstorm some other tips or tools to use to smooth out some of the rough stuff. So.
Yeah, I'd say that the audio technical tonight was the best I've been in so far.
Inclement weather, for example, what's your take on that? So we have a general plan.
Well, usually if school's closed, we don't have a meeting when there's inclement weather. So
Okay.
that's sort of been the baseline for it.
And we have historically had evenings, like when school would have been in session, but the snowstorm comes in late.
Then
and
I
we have to
might,
cancel. It's pretty rare.
true, but then I might opt to go on Zoom, and so I
I
don't
think
know
very-
how much heads up everybody would need for.
Very last minute is tricky because we designate the location a week in advance. So if the roads are really terrible and it's the Moncton night, if we kept the meeting, someone has to be at Moncton School because that's the designated location. And if we change it last minute, people wouldn't have proper notice, et cetera. So that's the only, it's not impossible, but it's the only consideration for that kind of a last minute decision.
Yeah, and it's not just us, it's the public. So if somebody does want to come to the physical location and we're all Zooming, doesn't work.
Okay. All right. Andrew, are we out of time? Yeah.
Yes, we are.
All right, we're not quite finished with this discussion, but we're out of time. So we're going to move, like we said, to our remaining items. Public comment. Is there any public comment? Nancy.
Thanks. In a way, this is maybe a meeting mechanics comment too. It was really interesting to hear the budget presentation tonight. And I bet I'm not the only person who is leaving with more questions. My questions have to do with personalized learning and whether it's a solution to some of the problems that we've been facing and how that might be reflected in the budget. Questions about district-wide positions and questions about the role of principals going forward in the budget, finalizing the budget, questions about ESSER funds, those sorts of things. And so my question is, and I'm hoping maybe you could answer it tonight, you have a January 11th meeting. You have a meeting at the end of January, which is going to be the meeting where you finalize the warning. And you have maybe another meeting that you would lay on about the budget. I know Kristen Blanchette was mentioning that sometimes happens. And my question is, as the board members have questions about the budget from what they heard tonight and the thinking they'll be doing, how can board members convey the questions forward in time for the superintendent and maybe others, maybe principals too, to address those questions? I mean, what are the mechanics of that so that people's questions can really get answered thoroughly and not in a rushed way? How might people convey their questions, board members convey their questions, and how do you want them to do that?
So we typically don't have a discussion, but I will say to board members, the last time we talked about questions, we asked members to send them to the chair, to me, to compile a list, and then Krista and I talked about working with those to create the document. So that has always been a process we've used to send the questions and gather them together. It's what we use when we have questions about pay orders. We try and centralize them to one spot and do it that way,
So given that your next meeting is the 11th of January, when would you want those questions from board members? By when?
I gotta,
Week before, probably, right?
so probably the agenda would go out a week ahead of that, so by the 4th.
Hey,
Christy,
Hey, I jumped on early in the first public comment and I wish that I had started with gratitude, so I'm throwing it at the end. It's been difficult fall for everyone, and I appreciate all the time you have all spent dealing with everything that you normally would, as well as all of us who have had concerns. So thank you very much. I thank the teachers, the board, superintendent for coming through and talking about all these really hard things. And I'm glad I stayed on because I appreciate the thought exchange and how that came out, and also learning more about the budget. So thank you all. And I am still concerned about the very important roles of staff that we've lost. And I think I'm glad to see that you're looking at the budget for reinstating some of those, and I hope you can find them. Thanks very much and have a great holiday.
thanks, Christy. All right, one more comment. All right, we'll move down to the meeting evaluation.
ready?
Yes.
All right. What is the level of engagement of all board members, high or low?
Hi.
Was the agenda followed, yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Comments?
We're almost on time.
Getting better. Good timekeeping. Yeah, like really?
Poor Hannah.
Oh, Hannah, you have no idea.
They're taking you down to the bunny.
Get rid of those big, long college courses.
Does the chair
They'll be more
effectively
interesting.
establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board, yes or no?
Yes.
Comments? Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process, yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Any comments? Other feedback to the chair? What went well with the meeting?
Technology was excellent today.
Sound. Time.
Sean Kimball.
Yes. Being, going to the bunny in the,
The bunny.
There's
only one though.
There's one here today.
There's a bunny?
Yeah, it's a therapy animal.
What suggestions do you have for ways to improve future meetings? Bring a bunny?
Or bunnies. Oh my gosh, yes, I can bring one.
Get rid of COVID.
Get rid of COVID.
Yes.
We miss me, thank you.
All right, that's it.
All right.
This on to bring us the versions.
Yeah. Is there a motion to adjourn at 9:23?
So moved.
Krista?
Second.
Sarah? All right, all those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Good night,
everyone. Happy
everybody.
holidays.